The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. That very day, the first day of the week, 2 of Jesus' disciples were going to a village 7 miles from Jerusalem called Emmaus, and they were conversing about all the things that had occurred. And it happened that while they were conversing and debating, Jesus himself drew near and walked with them, but their eyes were prevented from recognizing him. He asked them, "What are you discussing as you walk along?" They stopped, looking downcast. One of them, named Cleopas, said to him in reply, "Are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who does not know of the things that have taken place there in these days?" And he replied to them, "What sort of things?" They said to him, "The things that happened to Jesus the Nazarene, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, how our chief priests and rulers both handed him over to a sentence of death and crucified him. But we were hoping that he would be the one to redeem Israel. And besides all this, it is now the 3rd day since this took place. Some women from our group, however, have astounded us. They were at the tomb early in the morning and did not find his body. They came back and reported that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who announced that he was alive. Some of those with us went to the tomb and found things just as the women had described, but him they did not see." And he said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are, how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets spoke. Was it not necessary that the Christ should suffer these things and enter into his glory?" Then, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them what referred to him in all the scriptures. As they approached the village to which they were going, he gave the impression that he was going on farther. But they urged him, "Stay with us, for it is nearly evening and the day is almost over." So he went in to stay with them. And it happened that, while he was with them at table, he took bread, said the blessing, broke it, and gave it to them. With that, their eyes were opened and they recognized him, but he vanished from their sight. Then they said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he spoke to us on the way and opened the scriptures to us?" So they set out at once and returned to Jerusalem, where they found gathered together the 11 and those with them who were saying, "The Lord has truly been raised and has appeared to Simon." Then the 2 recounted what had taken place on the way and how he was made known to them in the breaking of the bread. The Gospel of the Lord. Did it ever occur to you to wonder where the Mass comes from? From where do we get the pattern or the sequence that we follow here at St. Sebastian and at Catholic churches like this all around the world? Most historians would trace the Mass to a document called the Didache, a Greek term that refers to the teachings of the 12 apostles to the nations. Didache, Didache. It is a short, anonymous work that dates to the 1st century, probably about 50 years or so after the death of Christ. Many early Christian communities treated the Didache as if it were an inspired work, one worthy of inclusion into what would become the New Testament. It is worth mentioning, of course, that it was the early Christian communities over the centuries that formed the New Testament. Jesus did not hand a book to anyone as he left the earth. It was the Catholic Church, moved by the Holy Spirit, that formed the gospel and the rest of the New Testament. The Didache did not make the cut, but one of its features is that it describes in fair detail the form of worship among the early Christians. And if you read an English copy of the Didache, of which several are available, you will find striking similarities to what we do in the Catholic Mass. It is the same pattern: a greeting, a confession of sins, and then the two main parts of the Mass before it ends. The liturgy of the Word, the readings from the Old Testament, followed by the teachings of the apostles, and then the Eucharist. The same thing that we do today, done by early Christians in dark catacombs and primitive private homes centuries ago. Our Mass preserves that legacy. But the pattern of the Mass has even earlier roots, anchored in part in this lengthy gospel that we just heard. This gospel, the journey of Emmaus, describes the Mass. Consider how the unnamed disciples encounter with Jesus. Consider how their encounter with Jesus reflects the pattern of our worship. The setting is later in the day, on that first Easter, when Christ rose from the dead. After they meet with Jesus, Jesus first leads them in the readings, in the liturgy of the Word. Beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them what referred to him in all the Scriptures. And were not our hearts burning as he opened the Scriptures? In other words, Jesus revisits with them the ancient Scriptures and then unfolds them in light of his life. This is what we had just been doing. And then how does their encounter end? The liturgy of the Eucharist. He was made known to them in the breaking of the bread. We follow that same pattern today. Perhaps these anonymous followers of Christ in the gospel are among those who would contribute to the formation of the Didache. It was out of this exchange, it was out of the remembrance of this exchange on the journey to Emmaus that the Mass grew. And what I want you to see is that while it is easy to overlook, our faith and our form of worship preserves these early roots, and that the events of the Bible are not coincidence. They lay down a pattern which we in this church hand on through the ages. But there is more. There is more after that Mass on the road to Emmaus. Consider, what do these two disciples do after it concludes? When Jesus departs, they set out at once to spread the good news. And there too lies a lesson for us as well.